Hello and welcome to BCP, Being Crisis Prepared, the business continuity podcast from Inveroy Crisis Management, hosted today by me, Matthew Wardner, and by Toby Ingram. We're going to talk today about two major news items, and then we have an interview, very excited about our interview with Vic Vitalik, and then we're going to finish with a resilience rant at the end of the podcast, hopefully sticking to our 30-minute timeline. We will see. So first in the news, I'm going to talk about climate, and we've spoken before about climate protesters, but this time is we're thinking about the impact that the climate issues could have on your business and some of the considerations that we need to put in place. And I'm looking at this from two perspectives. Firstly, across Europe at the moment, we're experiencing a range of climatic conditions ranging from significant floods in the UK, in Wainfleet in Lincolnshire, for example. Even yesterday, we're recording this on Tuesday the 25th, so on the 24th, floods in Edinburgh and Stirling, flash floods. That is significant, and Lincolnshire, they're talking about already a potential vegetable shortage for the UK for the rest of the year. But when you then couple with that with a few other items, for example, rain and hailstones in the middle of June in the Auvergne-Rhône Alps region of France, known as the Orchard of France, where they're talking about 80 to 100% of their crops being destroyed. And on the 18th of June, France's agriculture minister declared a natural emergency. We're starting to go, hang on a second, what might that mean? And is this a continuing thread? When we then look to the other side of the world, many of our listeners may remember last year, Cape Town nearly reaching day zero, running out of water, and we're hearing reports of the similar issue at the moment in Chennai in India. They're reporting that since 2004 they've experienced 11 of the 15 warmest years on record, which is significant. Apparently 44% of India is currently experiencing a drought, which is significant because it's approximately 500 million people. Well, how does Chennai affect the rest of the world? Interestingly, it's a major telecom centre, it's a major IT and software outsourcing location, it produces 45% of India's car manufacture, major centre for global research, and it's the financial back office for many of the world's banks, including the World Bank itself. So when we start to look at these things, you then start to think from a business continuity and crisis management perspective, so what? And I think the so what here is we need to check that our supply chain arrangements are secure. So Chennai, for example, if Chennai closes because the population can't get water, so they will leave Chennai and go to somewhere that they can, what does that mean for your bank back office activities? Can you take those activities and do it somewhere else? In effect, it's a loss of service on a large scale.
I think that's a really interesting point, Matthew, that your supply chain, when you say the word supply chain, we tend to think of stuff, raw materials, components for things that we make, fuel, etc., etc. But you also need to consider the supply of services. And it's our experience in dealing with clients that in many cases, if you've outsourced a service, as in this case, banks have outsourced their back office functions, or the World Bank has outsourced its back office function, there's an automatic instinct to believe that because providing that supply of service is now somebody else's responsibility, you can forget about it altogether and it's somebody else's problem. The trouble is that if there's a large-scale disruption like no water in Chennai, it rapidly becomes your problem. If your back office functions go away, it's fine to say, oh, but that was somebody else's responsibility, but that doesn't get you very far. You could still be without your back office functions, and we've come across this in a number of instances where clients have said, oh, but the supply is somebody else's problem, and therefore they tend not to plan for that supply being disrupted. They'll say there's financial penalties in place if the supply doesn't arrive, which is fine, but your supplier can pay the financial penalty, you still won't have the supply that you need, and therefore you need to consider how are you going to get it. So outsourcing is fine, it's a very good idea, it works really well, but it doesn't mean that all the problems go away, all the problems are outsourced as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, and therefore supply chain is a critical area that I think often is overlooked. What can you do about it? Obviously, you can create a second route for your supply chain. If it's goods that you're buying, you can create another supply there. Service is much more difficult, and therefore perhaps one of the things to look at is provide that assurance by checking your suppliers' business continuity arrangements. Do they have a backup water supply? Do they have an arrangement for single point of failure, loss of people in their own system? Can they move their services from Chennai to somewhere else that does have water, for example? And that, exactly as Toby says, you cannot get away from the fact that it is your responsibility to check your supply chain is going to supply what you want, when you want it, for the price that you want it, and the price your customers are willing to pay.
And I think it's particularly important if your outsourced functions are customer facing. So if your contracted out service has direct contact with your customers, in effect the customer is going to think it's you.
Yep.
And if they can't get an answer on the helpline because Chennai has been disrupted, they won't be interested in you saying this is a subcontractor issue, because as far as they're concerned, it is you.
Yep. And I just want to finish off on this area very briefly, talking about power supply. Interestingly, again, mentioned Cape Town. Cape Town is currently going through a period of energy crisis where they are turning off power to be able to manage it effectively on a pre-planned basis. Obviously, we've also recently this month had Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and some sites in Chile lose power for a period. And again, that what do you do when your utilities, that impact is worth considering, because it comes back to the same thing. If you're relying on getting something from a far off location, what do you do? Clearly, if you are that location, much more difficult, and you're now into, do you get your own generator so that you can guarantee your own power supply no matter what the grid is doing? Anyway, enough on that. Toby.
Thank you. The other news story that we're going to touch on this morning is the B word. It's Brexit. And as business continuity professionals, we major all the time on horizon scanning, on the basis that the best crisis you can have is the one that you don't have to go through. And you usually don't have to go through a crisis because you've horizon scanned effectively, you've seen it coming, you've pre-mitigated it, or you've avoided it, or in those very, very rare cases, you've managed to turn a disruptive event to your own advantage. And that's the nirvana for all of us. It doesn't happen that often because the world doesn't work like that. But in this case, of course, horizon scanning is made much easier because we know that Brexit, less the chance of a second referendum, Brexit is coming. I think it's safe to plan on that assumption. We know pretty much when it's coming. Less a renegotiated deal or another extension or whatever it is. It'll be Halloween the 31st of October. And we know within fairly broad parameters what it's going to entail, because there are things already becoming clear about, in the event of a deal, this is probably what will happen. In the event of no deal, this is likely what will happen. So although the workload is not welcome, because any extra workload is never welcome, people being as busy as they are, at least in the case of Brexit, there is a pretty good information set about the steps you would need to take, you would want to take for Brexit. And that information set is getting better all the time. So listening to Mark Carney speaking at the Mansion House last week, he was the one who was not interrupted by Extension Rebellion, unlike the Chancellor. But he said that of the reviews that the Bank of England has done recently, and they They spend a lot of time going out and seeing lots of businesses, usually at the sort of larger levels of businesses. He says that 40% or 150,000 businesses are not yet ready for Brexit. So they have not looked at the data that's available and have not taken the requisite common sense steps to get ready. There are plenty of good reasons for that, primarily being time and capacity. But even so, that's a big number. If that's the case for businesses at the larger level, it's reasonable to assume that it's also the case for smaller and medium-sized enterprises. So today I'm going to run through some of the things that should be considered and some of the things that should be done in the context of horizon scanning. We're now looking out 4 or 5 months to October, which is horizon scanning. There's a good information set, and there are a number of things that should be done. Just to put it into a little bit of context, whether the UK goes to World Trade Organization arrangements or the Canada-style arrangement with the EU, which is referred to as CETA, which is the EU-Canada Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which is effectively a free trade agreement, they're all going to take time to bed in. CETA actually took 7 years to agree, and Michael Barnier, the EU chief negotiator, is recommending this as the way ahead for the UK. So when things happen, they're unlikely to happen quickly, but nonetheless, preparation should still be done. There's a lot of resources out there. The Home Office Employer Toolkit is excellent. The British Chambers of Commerce have got together and put a common area on all their websites for the Brexit information, which I thoroughly recommend. I use the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce just because that's where I operate from, and it's all common sense stuff. It's and absolutely should be at least considered, if not done. So, if it's okay, Matthew, I'll go ahead and talk through some of these.
Yeah. Let's have a look at what we've got.
Okay, so first of all, if you have an internationally based workforce in Europe and in the UK, you need to look at their travel. There's a new UK immigration regime expected to operate from 2021. In the event of a no deal, EU, European Economic Area and Swiss citizens will be able to enter the UK for up to 3 months without a visa for work, visit or study, and European temporary leave to remain is available for those who wish to stay longer. And the European Community proposes granting UK citizens visa-free travel in those areas for up to 90 days in any 180-day period. Therefore, you need to consider what your internationally based workforce travel arrangements are going to be. So if you hire somebody from the EU, the European Economic Area or Switzerland, can they feasibly remote work from abroad to ease the travel burden? You need to look at what your requirements are for your staff to travel to and from Europe for the servicing of contracts, etc. Look at UK government guidelines on passport rules. You will, if you're going to transfer staff to and from branches in Europe, or for instance run a graduate training scheme, restrictions may apply which you're going to need to be aware of, and there's lots and lots of information on those sites that I've mentioned. So consider your workforce's travel requirements when new arrangements are in place.
So can I just ask, when I go to somewhere like Dubai or Abu Dhabi, clearly that's non-EU, I stand in the non-EU person's lane, and 10-15 minutes later I'm at the front of the queue and my passport gets a stamp and I move on. Is that what we're talking about for future EU members coming into the UK, or us UK residents going into France, Germany? It will just go back to this, that we will stand in a different queue at passport control. Is that the start point? Yes, it's certainly a start point. But for instance, you would need to travel to Dubai. You would need to check the visa requirements for Dubai for a non-EU citizen before you travel. Ah, okay, got it.
So there may be different requirements because the visa arrangements between Europe and Dubai may be different from what transpires between the UK and Dubai. Now, we would hope they would be similar, there wouldn't be too much to do, but what you don't want to do is to end up standing in the queue for 5 hours because your visa is not correct.
And if that involves going to an embassy or a consulate to get a pass and a stamp and so on, then that starts to grind business down and take up days that when we should be being productive, we're standing in a queue.
Correct.
Getting a flight, getting a train to a city to get a stamp and a passport or a piece of paper filled out when previously we haven't had to. And that at the moment is unclear as to which countries we're going to need which paperwork for in the future.
And it comes back to my point that arrangements are going to take time to bed in.
Yep.
But we advise you, if you can, avoid getting caught out.
Okay, is there anything else that we should
The second
consider?
point on your workforce is have a serious look at the qualifications, because the current system of reciprocal recognition between the EU and the UK is unlikely to apply. European Economic Area and Swiss qualifications, which are the equivalent in scope, content and level, should be recognised in the UK post-Brexit, and recognition decisions received in the UK before exit should remain valid. But consider, what are your skills, labour and qualification requirements for the first 5 years after Brexit, and ensure that you're not going to get caught out by somebody who was qualified today, or their qualification was recognised today, may not be qualified post-Brexit. This is something you need to watch out for.
Okay.
The third point on your workforce is to consider the issue of residency. So EU citizens already resident in the UK on exit day can apply for EU settlement scheme. They can apply for settled status if they've been here for 5 years, and if less than 5 years they can apply for pre-settled status. At the moment, Irish citizens will not need to apply to the scheme to protect their rights in the UK, and as we've spoken about, EU, EEA and Swiss citizens will be able to enter for up to 3 months without a visa for work, visit and study. But if you arrive after exit day, EU citizens will need to apply and qualify under the future immigration system, which is due in 2021 if they want to stay longer than 6 months. And again, I would advise go back to the British Chambers of Commerce Common Brexit page, because if you've got current European citizens who are going to come to the UK to work for you, the arrangements will again be different. And you're going to need to know what those are.
So rather than rushing and doing the whole of Brexit in one go, perhaps we'll keep the other areas that we might traditionally look at, because that's people. Then obviously there's premises, supply chain and technology that we could perhaps look at in future podcasts. But I just want to unpack some of those people issues. So some of the sectors that we look at and specialise in, for example, the oil and gas sector, very transitory population coming into the North Sea area, UK continental shelf as it's referred to go offshore, bringing lots of skills. Each time they come in, those individuals may be delayed in their ability to get to the stepping off point for them to get on a helicopter to go to the North Sea to carry out their routine.
Absolutely, because it's going to be a bespoke arrangement depending on the country that individual comes from, the amount of time they've already spent in the UK, how long they're going to spend in UK territory, etc., etc. So it is absolutely worth profiling your staff nationalities, how long they're going to spend working for you in UK territory, and getting ahead of the game so that they can hopefully just come in, get on the helicopter, get to work, because you do not want them sitting at Dover for 2 days.
Yeah, and I think for anyone from an oil and gas company who's listening to the podcast, yes, there are going to be issues there of coming in. You have to go through immigration, for example, at Aberdeen to get to the helicopter port to then fly offshore. Many of the platforms are more than 12 miles offshore, so they're in outside UK territorial waters. So how does that work? At the moment, therefore, that sounds as though that is an additional cost, either from an administrative burden of someone has to do that paperwork, and if you're going to push it down to your staff, then that's eating into their 2 on 2 off rotations. If you're going to put them in a hotel for a night because we now need to sort out the paperwork, it's an extra cost, etc. So brilliant observation there. Horizon scanning, we know that it's coming, all things being equal, therefore what can we do about it to reduce the impact of that factor impacting or disrupting our business, which makes perfect sense. And obviously, just because it happens to the oil and gas industry, another area we look at being academia, lots of impact potentially for Brexit on academia, but your high quality academics, professors and doctors that lecture in our world-class universities across the UK, that is going to be more difficult for them to get in and out of the country, or more difficult for them to stay unless they complete the paperwork early in this interim, may not be the right word, but this period of time that we have to get our act together. If you don't get your act together, you risk falling foul of regulation later.
Yeah, and I think the word you were looking for was in this interregnum.
Interregnum. There's a good word for an early. This is, for those listening. This is 8:30 in the morning. That's a good word for 8:30. Okay, is that enough on Brexit?
Well, yes. If I can finish off, I think the period to get prepared is quite short now, and I would be recommending that any client who falls into this category with an international workforce dedicate some resources to getting this right before it happens, so that at least you are aware of what's going on. I would not advise clients, never advise clients to bury their heads in the sand, but I would be putting, if you think this is going to be an issue for you, I would be creating a position that is Brexit officer for the next period, so that they can do the research, they can work out what you need, and they can get things in place. Yeah. And in future Brexit talks, we will cover cross-border trade, taxation and insurance. I think if I were in this situation, I'd be making best friends with my lawyer and my insurance broker, because it's critical. Contracts, currency, intellectual property, all of which are going to change, and regulatory compliance and data protection. These are quite big, chunky areas that you're going to need to get right, otherwise you'll get caught out.
Okay, so appreciate that with Brexit the clock is ticking, so rather than wait for our next podcast, please take Toby's list there and start having a think about all of those areas, because it is exactly what business continuity is about business resilience, to overcome things that we can see coming that we're not going to be able to dodge. Therefore, we have to get ready to deal with them in the best way we can as businesses. Okay, and I think I should make a small correction. It was Greenpeace, not Extinction Rebellion at the Mansion House, the protesters. But just in case anyone from either Greenpeace or Extinction Rebellion wants to pick a issue over that minor issue,
I beg both their pardon.
Okay, so just to finish off this part of our talk, Toby and I, we're going to talk about a rant in a second, but before we do that, I want to introduce someone who I've worked for a number of years when he was with Premier Oil, Vic Ritalik. For many years was the offshore installation manager on the Balmoral platform in the North Sea, then became the Premier Oil HSE manager based in Aberdeen, and then became an operations manager with Premier Oil for 18 months before setting himself up as a safety leadership consultant, and now doing great work with a number of companies that I'm sure he will tell us about. So Vic, good morning, and thanks for joining us this morning. Conscious that your time is very precious, so grateful for 10 minutes or so that you're going to be able to be with us. And I wonder if you could just start by saying hello to the listeners, but also just introducing us to an incident or an event that you think our listeners might benefit from.
Certainly. Good morning and hello. Quite a few years ago now, 10 plus years ago, I was working on quite an old first generation oil platform in the UK, and on a Friday realised over a period of hours that we were outside the conditions of the safety case, in so much as we had no serviceable lifeboats, none at all, and the platform at that time was in full production, a full complement of people on board, and I was quite a junior OIM, quite new to the role, and it led to quite a few decisions with onshore, quite a few meetings I had with my safety reps, and it led to my decision to partially downman the installation to a more manageable number that we could evacuate by other means.
So Vic, just to pause there for a second, Vic, if I may, just some of our listeners may not be oil and gas experts. So your role there as the OIM, or the offshore installation manager, effectively meant that that you were responsible for everything on board that platform: health, safety, welfare, safe operating of everything to do with that platform offshore. Is that about right?
Absolutely, yeah, totally. Legally accountable for everything that happened on and immediately around that installation.
So the issue there is the installation is built with a certain very detailed analysis of the risks, especially after the Piper Alpha incident that some of the listeners may remember from the late 80s, if I remember. Yes. And nowadays, safety is absolutely paramount on a rig, because obviously huge amount of hydrocarbons going through it, long way offshore. Something goes wrong, you must be able to respond and get your people off the platform if it gets to the stage that you can't control the incident. So without lifeboats, and how many people were on your platform roughly at that stage?
It's 72.
72 people, no lifeboats. Helicopters would have been an hour away?
An hour plus, yeah.
An hour plus. So at that stage, when the catastrophic incidents happen, your safety apparatus is nil, really. It's swim, I guess. Which is just, interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just expand a little bit for our non-oil and gas
sure.
Listeners. Interesting. Sorry, please do continue.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Normally the primary means of evacuation would be by helicopter, but if you were to have situations where either your helideck was unavailable or aircraft can't fly for any reason, thick fog or whatever, then you would be reliant upon these boats. So the interesting thing for me as a relatively new installation manager was that I then found myself in a bit of conflict between the training I'd had and what was expected, what I felt was right, and what I felt I was being asked to do, which was different. And it's interesting in as much as I defaulted to what I felt was right in the first instance, and then backed up by what my safety case. So the document that says how to keep an installation safe and the people on it safe. I was quite surprised to find that I was having to defend that decision at the time. So we did get aircraft. I did take 2 flights off the installation and got it down to a lower number, a number that we could have evacuated if the need arose. We could have evacuated by other means safely to the water. But the bigger issue was around and again, if you go back to Piper, some people may remember, even if they're not oil and gas people, they may remember that when Piper it was on fire and it was being fed from another installation for quite a period of time, and the whole decision making of when it's right to shut your installation down is quite a key one, in as much as the guy who's in charge should be allowed to make that decision. And I did. I think I put my people before production. The only 2 things I could feel I could do at that time to reduce the risk was to reduce the number of people exposed to the risk, and then to shut the installation down so that the hydrocarbon processing couldn't pose the same risk, and then recover from there. And I think that certainly for the future, for other people that were doing the same role as me at the time, I had quite a few phone calls saying, well, rather you than me, Vic, because I don't know what I would have done in that situation. And that really started to make me think, well, how much do you really trust your gut? And I'm a great believer that you do.
Yeah.
That tells you a lot.
No, and I think you when you are in an isolated location and you can feel isolated, even if physically you're not, and the leadership or your line manager is putting pressure on you to meet their immediate needs, and in this case, production equals income for the company, I'm sure, which is always a challenge of that. But when they have trained, selected, and entrusted you, which again is the same with any line management role, that, hang on a second, the man or woman who is actually out on the ground doing that job, do you trust their perspective? And but also then that person who is there on the ground to have the moral courage to, as you said, do the right thing, and accepting that there could have been significant potentially employment challenges. Standing up to your bosses and saying, no, I'm shutting down a platform, is a massive cost implication for the company. But actually, when you look at it in the cold light of day, by the sounds of it, they went, yeah, you're right. And legally you were right, you've got your safety case to back you up. But that deviation of change, if you'd have said, oh, okay, on this occasion, we'll carry on producing, eventually it's that classic of a little change, a little change, a little change. Each one on their own you might get away with, but taken cumulatively, it becomes a catastrophic issue. And anyone that's looked at these things, it sounds like a sort of bow tie incident where the event is the knot in the middle of the bow tie. To the left are all the things you put in place beforehand, and to the right are all the things that you need should the event occur. And lifeboats is one of those things that you only ever use them in a catastrophic event. So obviously it's not something that you'd have used every day, but to not have them removes one of those things, and really, really interesting. And that safety leadership, which I guess is where you are now with your new venture of encouraging the new generation to stand up and say, no, it is the right thing to do, is really important. Have you got time to just say a few thoughts on your new venture and how that's going?
Yeah, certainly. You're absolutely right. That the reason that I've chosen to set up on my own and at the moment certainly focus on safety leadership and what does that mean to new and current supervisors. The bit I get the most out of is when you start chatting to them, when you're coaching them, and you're listening to what they've got to say, is you get to this discussion around an understanding of what would be the right thing to do, but then the conflict comes. But Rick, I know we should stop there, but, and the but centres around, either production or productivity or money or whatever it is, or their boss's perception. And they say, well, yeah, I understand all of these things and they will always be there. But when we're talking about leadership and we're talking about safety leadership, it's for me, it's the same thing when it gets to that stage. And that's when you have to stand up and be counted. And the right thing to do is the right thing to do no matter what else is going on. So put that out of your mind. And, I put it back to that event, and there have been others, but I've put it back to that one event. The other thing that I'm trying to put across now is something I learned way back then, and is that certainly in the oil and gas arena, if you're on a remote location and you are actually there and you have an issue to deal with, whether it's an emergency one or a non-emergency one, an event that exposes you to unusual risk, when you're on the location, you can tend to focus on the consequence. The guys who are remote from you, who are sitting onshore, and I've been one of those sitting onshore as well, it's very easy to focus on the likelihood and argue it'll never happen. In that case for the lifeboats, we've never used one in anger, so what's the problem? Well, the problem is, should I ever need to use one in anger and I don't have one?
Yeah.
That's the problem. So it's getting it across to some of the young lads coming through the industry now, to say to them, to he or she, if you're in a situation where you're having to make a decision and you feel that you're having to alter that decision away from the right thing because of all these other issues, productivity, production, cost, whatever, you need to stop and think. You need to stand back, because people are looking to you and at you to do the right thing.
Yes.
and that I think is something that is maybe missing from some areas of industry, not just oil and gas.
Yeah.
And it it needs. I think it helps if someone's got some experiences of saying, well, I've done it in the past and it worked, or I've done it in the past and it was difficult afterwards, but I would do it again.
Yeah.
Because it's still the right thing to do, and that's really what motivates me to do what I'm doing now, to be honest.
Yes, I'm sure on the one hand, the right thing, it can be a challenge for someone to stand up and tell people, I don't know, wear your coveralls correctly, your protective clothing, remove your wedding ring from your finger because it could snag on machinery, all those sort of, it's a bit like being back at home or back at school and you're constantly being told off for things. But that ability to sleep at night knowing that if something bad had happened, you have done the right thing to A, hope that it doesn't happen in the first place, but if it does, the consequences have been reduced because everyone did the right thing, everyone was properly trained, and there's probably, we could go on forever about finding the time to do the training, especially again when you've got other competing issues. How easy is it to say, oh, muster every week is always done on a Tuesday, on a Sunday, because that fits in with meal timings. Well, people then have their bag ready to go and they're almost sort of at the lifeboats before the alarm goes off. It's not proper training, it's just putting a tick in a box. And as soon as you get to that point, actually you need to stand back, look in the mirror and go, am I achieving the intent of being a safer site, or am I just putting a tick in a box to satisfy my line manager's needs? And absolutely. Having the moral courage, as you said there, to do the right thing and understand why you're doing it is thank goodness the likes of you, Vic, are now taking your knowledge and experience and putting it back into the industry and making it safer for everybody.
But I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Matthew, when you use the word intent and the word why, and that's something that certainly in my industry has been missing in some areas where we maybe do just tick boxes. Not everyone, but some people do, and they're quite happy with that, and nothing goes wrong. But I think explaining to people why we do things, and part of that explanation is for them to understand the intent of a rule. Once people get that in their head and can see that they'll be backed up to do the right thing every time, I think the world would be a better place. Yeah,
brilliant. Vic, thank you so much for your time this morning, and we'll call it there. But if you're happy, I think our listeners would appreciate perhaps another session with you in a few months' time, and perhaps we'll be able to delve into some of the safety leadership issues, and again, good practice and ways that people, both oil and gas and elsewhere, can improve their own performance by listening to some of your words. So if that's okay, I'd look forward to doing that in the future.
Yeah, more than happy to, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vic.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Vic. That was great to hear from Vic there. Toby, resilience rant.
Yes, I thank you, and thank you to Vic. What a great piece to hear. Perfect for a little bit after 8:30 in the morning. So it's not necessarily a rant, it's a story, if that's okay, and focused in Scotland because that's where we both work and operate from. And it's I think it's a reasonable segue from horizon scanning. And I'll just tell you the story. So it concerns Tom Dewar, who was born in 1864 in Perthshire in the marvellously named village of Dull. Wouldn't I love to have an address that had the village of Dull in it? But contrary to his birthplace, Tom was anything but dull. In his later life, he lived permanently in the Savoy Hotel from 1904 to 1930. I shudder to think of his laundry bill. He owned only the third motor car to be registered in Britain, following the registrations of the Prince of Wales and his great friend Thomas Lipton, who many of you will recognise the name from the little yellow tea bags you still get today. So the two of them, they were known as Whiskey Tom, which was Dewar, and Tea Tom, which was Lipton. Tom Dewar's motto in life was, of the two evils, always choose the most interesting. When he was travelling around the world looking for markets. He once sent a telegram to Thomas Lipton from Africa, and the telegram read simply, "I can buy 3 wives here for a pound of Lipton's tea. Please send samples of tea." To which Lipton replied, "Tea dispatched by fast ship. Please send samples of wives." One of those legendary communications. But Tom Dewar was one of the smartest men that I've had the privilege of reading about, and he had the ability to not only horizon scan, but to look at the environment that was in front of him and find opportunities within it. So in the 1870s, sailing ships were still wooden, but they'd moved to having metal frames, so iron ribs, etc., which made them much tighter and much faster. One of the end results of that was that foodstuffs imported from America arrived in Europe much quicker, and although nobody knew it at the time, some of the aphids, insects, were still alive on the foodstuffs that came from America, obviously different in nature, etc. And in the 1870s, it was identified retrospectively that the phylloxera aphid destroyed about 40% of the French vineyards. And it took fully 20 years for people to work out what had gone on, because obviously scientific testing nowhere near as advanced as it is now. Various solutions were tried, and eventually in 1890 they had grafted some aphid-resistant Texan vines into the European stock, which allowed the agriculture to recover. But in that interregnum, there you go.
Twice in one morning.
Twice in one morning. Tom Dewar had worked out that there were hundreds of thousands of very, very dry throats in Europe, which were without their customary beverage of wine, and he, with some other entrepreneurs, really gave birth to the blended whiskey industry, which is such a big part of Scottish enterprise today. And the reason that the blend came in was consistency, because us rough Scotsmen were happy to drink pretty much anything that came out of pretty much any barrel. And so your Glenfiddich, one barrel would taste markedly different from another, but that wasn't good enough for European customers. And if they saw a Dewar's label on a bottle of whiskey, they wanted it to taste like Dewar's. So we began to blend, which produced the consistency of taste. And indeed, one of Dewar's earliest adverts, his straplines, was "Dewar's, it never varies." So he was speaking to that desire for consistency on the part of the Europeans. He bought the Lambeth Shot Tower in London, which was then the tallest building in London, could be seen from pretty much anywhere in the city. And it was by then in disuse. It used to be used for making musket shot, and the way you used to mass produce musket shot was build a huge brick tower, fill it with water, put a metal grill on the top, lay the lead on top of the metal grill, and build a fire on top of the lead. Lead, low melting point, melted by the fire, dropped through the grill as a globule and descended through the very, very tall column of cold water, and by the time it reached the bottom, it was a perfect sphere and it was a perfect size. That's how you must mass produce musket shot. And there were lots and lots of these shot towers, but the London one was in Lambeth. So he bought the then disused tower, and with the help of 1,400 coloured light bulbs, 6 miles of electric cable, he built a 68-foot high figure of a Highlander in what we now know as neon, with a kilt, which, the way the lights worked, it looks as though it was swaying in the breeze, and the man was constantly drinking a glass of whiskey. And so he saw the opportunity with the decimation of the wine crop. He saw the opportunity to advertise in a very innovative way that could be seen by the whole of London, and he did lots and lots of other advertising. He was a brilliant marketeer, so he used to go and recruit out-of-work actors in Shaftesbury Avenue, dress them in the finest clothes available, and send them en masse to the most popular restaurants in London, where they would demand Dewar's whiskey, fully knowing full well that there wasn't any there. And when the waiter said, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't carry Dewar's," they would react very theatrically and command the attention of the restaurant. "What do you mean there's no Dewar's? Do you have any idea of the combined wealth of all my friends?" And within about 6 weeks, every restaurant in London was stocking Dewar's whiskey, fearful of a similar mauling.
Which I guess is a little bit like the influencers today on social media.
Absolutely.
The power of that communications and the audience to whom you are communicating is so important, isn't it? And,
Absolutely.
And interesting, the talk there of the impact on the wine trade. Okay, that was caused by an aphid. Whereas we're now talking earlier in the podcast about the impact of climate on parts of France. I mentioned Rhone. Well, that's southeast France. Bound to be grapes down there somewhere that's producing wine. Parts of Lincolnshire. So our Tom Dewar of 2019, looking for that opportunity of if there's going to be a shortage of X, how can I take that as an opportunity and stock my shelves with something that's going to be pleasing to the audience, that my customers, and encourage them to perhaps think in a different way. Okay, long term, I guess the wine industry is looking pretty healthy, but for that 20 years and the immediate aftermath, there is still a massive demand for blended whiskey, and therefore that cash cow moment of how do you get in there and make the benefit of it before your competitor has recovered is all what horizon scanning is about, and identifying, hang on a second, that's an opportunity. Can I use all those things that I've prepared business continuity wise for a bad occurrence? Can I now turn those to my advantage? So I've got a spare warehouse or warehousing options. I've got the ability to find extra quality staff. I've got the supply chain to be able to get the raw materials in because I had it in case it all went wrong. Now I'm also using it in case it goes well, and I can seize that moment to maximize the opportunity, which so many people think of resilience as a negative. And by and large, we are harbingers of doom when we turn up and run an exercise. But actually, if you have a resilience plan, it also enables you to grab that fleeting opportunity, knowing when you sign that contract to say, I can provide X in Y time, that you've already done your homework because you've done it to protect you from fire, cyber attack, or whatever. Fascinating. Okay.
And just to finish that, Tom Dewar, his blended whiskey, white label or whatever it was, and using the shot tower to advertise it, is where we get the phrase, I'm looking at Matthew now.
No, I have no idea. Go on.
A shot of whiskey.
Clever.
You like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and what a fantastic Scottish entrepreneur. His life story is just a riot to read. So if you're suffering from insomnia, it's well worth having a look at. And to, as you've done, Matthew, bring it forward to the current time. We look now at Sainsbury's, who, in a similar way, are getting ahead of the changing trends in food consumption, trends in consumption as a whole, and they've opened their first meat-free butcher, which is a contradiction in terms, obviously, but you get what it means, because they've looked at their data and some of the statistics that they've isolated. There's a 24% increase in customers searching for vegan products online in the last year. That's huge, 24%. There's a 65% year-on-year growth in the sales of plant-based products, and 52% of British consumers are reducing meat consumption. So they're now getting ahead of this. They're not trying to fight it, and they're looking for the new products to fill what is becoming an obvious gap in the market. Their strapline being, it's better for the planet, it's better for global food security, it's better for animals, all of which I would absolutely agree with. They also say it's better for human health, which I have to put a question mark against, because I haven't seen the data that establishes that it is better for human health. I think it's a personal choice, but the real point is that Sainsbury's are looking good for horizon scanning, getting ahead of the trends, and trends in food consumption are so important, and doing I think a great job.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Toby. And that brings us to the end of our podcast for this month. If you have a question or observation, a rant, a jargon that you'd like us to bust, please do get in touch. Our email, bcp@inveroy.com, Inveroy spelled INVERROY.com. and it'd be great to hear from you. That's all from us for this month. Thanks very much for your time, and we wish you well. Thank you.